So here we are, just a quick, I kind of like to put us in a context here. So we went from long battles between Devatas and Asuras, the demigods and the demons. At some point, they're churning the ocean. Their battle again a battle for the Amrit, and then the appearance of Mohini Murti, the incarnation of Krishna as a beautiful, beautiful feminine incarnation of Narayana. And so after all this battle that almost seemed endless, Bali Maharaj is resuscitated, and then he is the leader of the Asuras, and once again they've taken charge. And so somehow we end up here in this hermitage of Kashyapa Muni and Aditi, which is just an ashram, a quiet setting. The reason why is that Aditi and Kashyapa are the parents, the progenitors of the demigods. So it's her family, the family that they are concerned about. So Aditi is showing some distress that her family has kind of disappeared. They've lost their reign. And so this is where we are here. So let's look at the verse. I like to look at the verse and kind of note, well, one thing is personally, because I like to work on my Sanskrit, but there's many beautiful things about, a verse if you look into it, just the Sanskrit itself. So let me just kind of look through here. Kena ham, so kena aham, by which I, vidhina, which vidhi, O Brahmana, upashta se jagatpatim. So that's a nice line there. Upashta se jagatpatim. Jagatpatim is the like Jagannath. The Jagatpatim is the Lord or the master of Jagat, just like Ganapati. This is Jagatpati. So Ganapati is the Lord of the Ganas and the Bhutas. So she's asking Upashtasye. Upashta meaning Upa. Like other words that are similar, like Upanishad or Upadesh, like Upadeshamrita. Upashta is stand near, like Upanishad is Upa and Nishad, which is to sit near, and Upadesh is to direct near, to basically means to instruct. She's asking, how can I become close to Jagatpatim? Yatta me satya sankalpo vidadyat sa manoratam. And here Prabhupada translates manoratam as ambitions or desires, but a manorat is the mind, the cart, the vehicle of the mind, and so that is perhaps the desires, or it carries the desires. So anyway, maybe that was just nerdy. I don't know. I just like looking at the Sanskrit. So now looking at the purport again. So Aditi is asking that, I think Chaitanya Charan made a brilliant point that while she's asking, she may ask because she's in distress. She asks Kashyapa for help, and at first he says, "Well, why is this bothering you?" And he gives her what would be considered like a siddhanta, like the absolute truth is that this shouldn't bother you. You should worship Vasudeva only. But he says he still gives her the payavrata to perform, to give her some kind of vidhi, which is translated as here as regulative principle. But I want to speak about that a little bit more. It also means like rights. So he's giving her instructions, despite there's an absolute like detachment that could be here, but he gives her something according to what she's requesting and what her distress is. And I thought that was a good point by Chaitanya Charanji. Um, so in the purport of Prabhupada quotes, the first thing he quotes is "Man proposes, God disposes," and this is that's actually a quote that goes to an old Christian text, well, 15th century Christian text called the Imitation of Christ, and it's actually written in Latin, um, and the Latin is "Homo proponit, sed Deus disponit." I mean that was anyway. That was also cool to say the Latin. Homo proponit, sed Deus disponit, which means man proposes and then God disposes. The full quote in translation is, "For the resolutions of the just depend rather on the grace of God than on their own." Excuse me. Let me see. "For the resolutions of the just depend rather on the grace of God than on their own wisdom, and in Him they always put their trust. Whatever they take in hand, for man proposes, but God disposes. Neither is the way of man in his own hands." So, as Prabhupada is conveying the point that whatever plans that we may lay down, or we may have for ourselves or the world, it's in many senses, in the real sense, it's uncertain, and it is up to us. It's uncertain to us, but it is certain to God. And so, whatever plans we may have, God may have other plans. So that's also conveyed. That's the point conveyed here by Prabhupada, and ultimately what will be Satya Sankalpa. Another point I like he makes in the purport is that he cites the Bhagavad Gita, Chaturvida Bhajante Mam, Jana Sukritino Arjuna, Arto Jigyasur Arta Arti, Jnana Cha Bharatar Shabha. And these are a description of the four types of people that worship Krishna or come to Krishna. And that is the Arta, the distressed, the desire of wealth, who is the Arta Arti, the Jigyasur, who is the inquisitor, and then, well, the Gyani is the person searching for the truth. In the text, he says Gyani is the best, but he says here Aditi is Arta, and she is Arta. She is distressed. And I think there was a nice point yesterday also in yesterday's verse with His Grace, His Holiness Jayadvaita Swami, that Krishna is Dina Anukampana. And again, Sanskrit is a beautiful word, but compassionate to well, he said translated as poor, but for those who are destitute or those who are in need of help. So while Aditi is Arta, distress, Krishna is Dina Anukampana. Anukampana is also a nice word. Anu meaning alongside, and kampana actually means to tremble. So it means one who is beside one who is trembling. So it means, it takes on a different meaning. It means compassion, and he's Dina Anukampana. So as much as Aditi is distressed, Krishna is Anu, alongside her in that distress. So that's also a beautiful point. So I wanted to some things I had some thoughts on in the verse was here in the verse itself. It says, "Kenaham vidhina Brahman," and she says, "By which vidhi," which Prabhupada translates as regulative principle. But in many contexts, that vidhi refers to rights or injunctions or scriptural rights, scriptural injunction. And as a priest or purohit, the term comes up quite a lot for me, because when we do the rites, whether it's a prana pratishta or a samskar, someone would say, well, what's the vidhi? Is there a prana pratishta vidhi? What's the ritual? What's the rite? And it kind of, maybe it's common parlance that people say this, but it is, sometimes it could refer to what is the ritual itself, or it could times using it to refer to a text in which that rite is described. So here, and I have I was wondering if I should look at the time it is here. It is, I had an interesting, so okay, yes, so I had this, an interesting story about what Vidhi is. Well, maybe to get an idea of what Vidhi means. I've gone on my way to and from. Sometimes I go. My family's from the Philippines. I stop in Thailand. Thailand has a very rich culture, a very traditional culture, and although they are officially declare themselves as a Buddhist country, if you look, you'll see that they're very strong kind of Hindu, this culture of Puranas and the epics, the Itihasa is pretty prevalent in the culture. Like the emblem of Thailand, the national emblem of Thailand is Garuda, and the official like airline of Thailand is Garuda Airlines. So you'll see even in the palace of the king, all over the walls are these beautiful paintings of the Ramayana, or what they call the Ramkien. So the origins of the culture, even though they're externally very Buddhist, in most temples you see like references to Ram and the Ramkien. Also because that lineage is tied to the king, the royal family somehow. But the ties, I don't know if India agrees with that, but but for Thailand, they see that he's Chakravartin, and I think they see the king's lineage as part of the Surya dynasty. Cultures have different culture emerges differently and as it moves from place to place. But the interesting thing, so going to Vidhi, let me remind you, we're talking about Vidhi, is that they have this culture of asceticism. They have these like forest monks, these people who practice, well, they call it magic. They're a fairly they may be superstitious, but there's a very rich kind of combination of like indigenous culture. So there's forest monks and forest temples, and they also have these forest like yogis, and they say that the culture originates from these. I've seen images of them. They're just like these old wise men who have like these Fu Manchu kind of beards and these hats, and they wear like deer skin, and they look very kind of old, but more in the Chinese style. But they call these people the Russis, and the Russis is a cognate or a derivative of the Sanskrit word rishi, so that they're actually gained some of this tradition from the rishis. And I visited one of these ashrams, and they were doing like what they call sakyant, and there's also fahyant, but basically they tap into either paper or copper, and sometimes they tap into the skin itself, the yantra, and they do a pratishta to the yantra, like they chant mantra into it, and it's an interesting, derivative of the traditional culture. But I saw them doing the ritual, and I asked somebody, well, what's he doing? And he says this person has very big wicha. He has big wicha. I was like, what's wicha? And he's like, it's magic. This is magic. And he says, very big magic. And I said, well, that's interesting. Like, consider wicha magic. And growing up in America, like, I grew up, I don't know, maybe it's the 90s and watching movies or something, but Wicca gets associated with, well, I thought it was Wicca. Like there's a Western, a European terminology for, or American, I'm not sure, but Wicca or Wiccans, who they consider witches. It's Halloween time, right? So I was like, why would in Thailand a Western word wicha be in Thailand? But it took me a while, and I found one text that somebody said that the word wicha is actually a derivative of the word vidhu in Pali, and that the original word is the vidhi in Sanskrit. So in Thailand, they were looking at this. Apparently, I think that there was this. The traditions had been passed, but because it kind of gets disconnected from, say, maybe the source, whether it could be time or it could be culture. What was once like a religious injunction or a scriptural injunction with a source becomes more like magic. It becomes more like a more mysterious thing. And I noticed they were saying bija mantras when they were saying incantations towards these yantras. But I wonder if they know that the bija can be or if they're bijas or if they're connected to actual full mantras, or maybe they've been lost. But it was interesting. So the point, going back to this, was vidhi. That vidhi, and I remember telling Prajumnaji about this. I was driving him to like the bus station or train station, and he said, "Well, vidhi or vidya, it could be vidya." He said, "It could be vidya or vidya, but either way, vidhi or vidya refers to the injunctions, the rites, the ritual." So it's very interesting, the use of ritual. And so as a priest, like I said, we use these rites. Well, not use them, we follow them. We try to follow them. And so vidhi could refer to the rites, the literature which describes those rites, or as Prabhupada describes here, as the regulative principles. And for us, that would mean, if that's what he means, the four regulative principles are vidhi. And the purpose of vidhi, I think that there's also a negative connotation surrounding ritual and rites. But I could only imagine that if you grew up it's different for a person to grow up in a culture and practice rites and not kind of know what they're connected to. Maybe at some point of maturation, they connect it, they see the source and the purpose of it. But rites generally do have a purpose, and that purpose for us especially in our lineage, is to allow bhakti to develop. I'll look into that a little bit more with Rupa Goswami's definition of what vidhi means. But for us, I could think of two popular verses in the Gita. Yasastra vidhim utsritya vartate kamakarta. Nasasidhim avapnoti nasukham naparam katim. Right. So for those or whoever yasastra vidhim utsritya, who disregards the vidhi, for the person who disregards the vidhi, Krishna says, this is Krishna, he says, vartate kamakarata. If they're not following the vidhi, then they're only doing their kama. They're following their own desire and their own whim. So, nasasidhim, he says that person will not attain perfection. For me, I'm just like, okay, I'm not perfect. I'm okay with that. But then he says, nasukim, nasukam. He's like, so not nasasidhim avapnuti, nasukam. I was like, oh, well, I'm not perfect. But he says also, you won't be happy. Oh, so the materialist, maybe that's a little bit more, that might hit home. But then the final declaration is, he says, naparam gatim, that you will not find, or you not reach the ultimate, you will not gatim, go to the param, you will not go to the great ultimate destination, or perfection, or again, I guess going back to perfection, but whatever the ultimate goal of humans are, if you simply follow your karma, it won't work. And this is Krishna's declaration. To discuss that more, I'm happy to. Another text, another part of the Gita that I do think of Vidhi. Well, I'll say a little bit more, but there is tad vidhi pranipatena parishpasena sevaya. Yeah, tad vidhi pranipatena parishpasena sevaya. Upadekshanti te jnanam jnaninas tat padarshana. So we generally use this as a reference to, well, this is how we identify a guru. This a lot of times is referring to the guru. We could cite this verse, well-known verse, that knowledge. If we want to understand this knowledge, to see the person who has jnaninas tattva, they have tattva darshan, that they have darshan of tattva, that pranipatena we must parishpasena sevya and upadekshanti te jnanam. We must take instruction from them. No, I know, you're right. I no, this is not. I want to say also that I'm not being. I'm not. I got a note from somebody. It's true. I'm not speaking. I wanted to clarify that too. I wanted to go through the verse first, but you must serve somebody to understand the truth. Now, like I said, I wanted to be intellectual. I did not want to be intellectually dishonest. This is not the vidhi. Like I said, I thought about verses. This is vidhi. There's vidhi, and then this is vidhi with vid and da. So this is the imperative sense of to know. Vid is the root. So in that sense, it's different. It's different. But in the context of the chapter of the Gita and chapter 4, there are references to the rights. But this is not vid. The point is that this is something that I wanted to bring up later, also in relation to Sankalpa, Satya Sankalpa. But it is vidhi. But as I was going to say, I'm not going to be intellectually dishonest in the sense that this isn't the same vidhi, but it is the same root, vid. And what is the right, the purpose of the rights, which will go into Satya Sankalpa. So thank you for asking that. Well, it was a private question, but I wanted to address it. I have it here also. It's not the same, but that's also a point I wanted to make, that you have to be careful, like to make sure that these references you don't want to take things out of context. And Sanskrit is very is beautiful and complicated. You can't just think vidhi means vidhi everywhere. You have to be careful. So like the point is, but it's not. But here I want to bring this point up because it'll summarize in the end what it means to really be what the purpose of the vidhi is. Okay, but so vidhi is we should in the practice of vidhi is we consider vaidhi. And in the context of our tradition, we consider this vaidhi sadhana bhakti. And vaidhi, as Rupa Goswami defines, yatra ragano tatvat pravrittir upajayate shashanem shashan nayavaiva shastrasya sa vaidhi bhaktir uchite. Excuse me. Now, and so tatra vaidhi. Now here's the definition of vaidhi, where the actions of bhakti arise not from the attainment of raga, but from the teachings of scripture. It is called vaidhi bhakti. The vidhi, there are many rites which we generally have to perform. Well, in a culture, a Brahminical culture, in a Brahminical culture, it is a lifestyle. It's supported by the community, but because in our tradition, somewhat of the essence of our tradition is transported to Western culture. It's not as evident. It's not as supported as we practice it here. And so we have begun through Prabhupada. We have a society in which this vidhi can be practiced and observed as a support to develop bhakti. So my Guru Maharaj will speak tomorrow. I'm happy to precede him in that sense, like to be here and I actually speak about, say, one thing that he describes about the regulative principle, that he sees the regulative principles as he calls them principles of cognition, that for us to understand something truly, that it's not because these are just rules or restrictions, that if we want to understand something truly, we have to observe these principles. Because if and for him there are four, for Prabhupada lines there are four that we don't eat. We don't eat meat, fish or eggs, no intoxication, gambling, no intoxication, no gambling, and no illicit sex, because this is going to it could create an attachment that would change our perception of what we're reading or what we're learning or what truth we're trying to observe. So for him, I remember I asked once to him, I've been reading Tattva Sandarbha, and Jiva Goswami gives an analysis of Pratyaksha, Anuman, and Shabda. And of course, I mean, it's spoken of frequently also by Prabhupada that Pratyaksha and Anuman are imperfect, and Shabda is Shabda can be the only valid way to the valid pramana, the valid way to know a thing. That means through scriptural injunction. And I thought, this is myself, and I think, I mean, it's just a thought I had. I don't know if it's correct. I didn't think it was correct, but I wondered. I was like, well, but what if that scripture is being perceived? Scripture is being perceived, and scripture is analyzed through Hanuman. So Pratyaksha, I thought, well, is Pratyaksha still valid in the case of Hanuman, in the case of Shabda? And this is what he told me. He said, this is why you have to make sure that your perception, your understanding is correct, that your senses have to be purified. And that's why we follow the regulative principles. So we can understand Shabda correctly. We can understand the scripture correctly. Yes, Pratyaksha does play a role, but you have to be qualified to understand it. You have to purify those senses. So the regulative principles are principles of understanding, principles of cognition. Maybe he'll speak more about that tomorrow. The other point I wanted to speak about was Satya Sankalpa. The Satya Sankalpa here, Prabhupada says, quote unquote, he says is very important. He says that he says that he says it's very important because we do vidhi. When we do vidhi, we do sankalpa. We'll do Hari Om, Govinda Govinda Govinda. We put the mudra, we put it on our lap. The sankalpa is the intention for which we are doing this ritual. And so the Satya Sankalpa, I'll say shortly here that the Satya Sankalpa, in some of the commentaries, as I was speaking with Prajumnaji, he says Vijay Dwaj from the Madhva Mat, or one of the lineages. He says the Satya Sankalpa here refers to Hari. And Raghava Acharya. He says that Yena Prakarina. Somehow, he says, by which method do you worship Jagatpati? He asks. And then he says, this must be connected to Bhagavan. So the Satya Sankalpa is important, that there has to be an important intention regarding Vidhi. If we find ourselves practicing Vidhi without the right intention, without the true intention, that's why it's Satya Sankalpa, that has to be connected to the essence of why we're doing it. That's why I said earlier, sometimes a person could be raised in a culture and not know why they do it, as opposed to someone who might say convert. They would understand why they've made this decision to perform these rites or rituals. But it comes in many different levels. Let's see, there's only a little bit of time. I just want to make the final point is that just the summary is that while Vidhi, there has also been kind of a discussion that there's two types of sadhana bhakti. This is in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, and that there's still an active discussion about Vaidhi sadhana bhakti and Raganuga sadhana bhakti. And while there are different camps that have different opinions that you could see, from my estimation, in a humble estimation, is that there will always be some type of interaction of Vaidhi and Raganuga. And some people say Vaidhi, following rites, do not lead to this Raganuga. Raganuga is kind of like the natural bhava, which they say rises from Lobha to serve Krishna. And some say that it might be different. I mean, nobody wants to. It also says in the Chaitanya Charitamrita that you will not if somebody follows Vaidhi alone, they will not attain Rajendranath Krishna. This is in, let's see here. This is Adi. This is Adi Leela chapter 3. Sakala Jagate More, Kari Vidhi Bhakti. Vidhi Bhakti Vraja Bhava, Aiti Nahi Shakti. So he says, everywhere in the world people worship me according to scriptural injunctions. But simply by following such regulative principles, one cannot attain the loving sentiments of the devotees of Brajabhumi. So that is a sense that I think that if you simply follow Vaidhi alone, which is the point here, if you were simply do by Vaidhi, by following these rites without the intention, without this, like the right intention, the right motive, which is to develop devotion for Krishna, then you'll simply be following, empty rules and regulations. And there are a few examples I thought of with this. I mean, there are different levels of it, and many, like say Dhruva, for example, while he has darshan of Vasudeva, it's not, say, Braj Krishna. Even in the case where he's prescribed by Narada Muni to follow certain rules, he suggests certain things for him to follow. Dhruva still has desires to be, to be the king, to be the leader, to be the emperor of the world, to have power. And he's honest to Narada Muni about that. Narada Muni says, well, just perform this austerity in this place in Madhuvan, and then you'll have darshan of Narayana or Vasudeva, and he'll give you what you seek. Anything that is sought. Somebody seeks something from Narayan, he will give. And Dhruva does that. But once he actually has darshan, when Vasudeva Narayan comes to see him, he practically forgets all of those things, or it changes, it transforms him. He becomes a bhakta. Those desires what he wanted, his ambitions are no longer the same. They're transformed. He becomes fixed on the lotus feet of Narayan. Another example, of course, are the gopis who are following their rites, their rituals, but they're willing to, when they hear the flute, Krishna playing his flute, they completely disregard all of these rites. It doesn't mean that the rites should be disregarded. Right? See, it means that the rites should be followed to the point that they bring us to Krishna in whatever way. And you have to remember the intention of the rites that we perform, and the integrity, because you have to have integrity as you perform those rites. And for us, I mean, my Guru Maharaj always says, it's very important for us to kind of keep that honesty as we perform these rites, as we are devotees, and that includes like the yajna of the age, Sankirtan yajna. And anyway, I'm gonna stop there. It's 8 o'clock. I'm sorry, I think I had a little bit more, but I tried to summarize it more quickly. Let me see if there's some questions here.
Hi, Krishna Bro. I saw there's one question here, but it may not be directly connected to what you spoke. I think it is from the purport.
Let's see.
How is I can copy it and paste for you.
I'm just looking at it right now.
Okay.
How is the inquisitive and one who is searching for knowledge different as mentioned in the purport? Okay, and then let me just double check. Let me expand on the 4 regulated principles and on how they help develop bhakti. Is it Vidhi? Oh yeah, that was just to Nanda Gopa. Yes, it is different, and yeah, it's vid in imperative case. We could talk about that. Okay, so how is the inquisitive different from the person searching for the truth? Right? How is the jnani different from the? I think it's the jigya. Well, there's
Jigyasa.
Right? Is it that's
yeah, it's in the purport, that verse is quoted, and there is the translation. That's what I think is referring to.
My understanding is that the jnani is genuinely searching. Well, I mean, they're genuinely searching for the truth. Someone who's inquisitive could have questions, but jnani, I mean, again, in the Sanskrit, it implies differently, right? Because the jnani is always kind of viewed as like this person searching for an absolute truth, and many times the jnani is referred to the people who are searching for Brahman realization. But whatever the point is, the jnani is focused on understanding the truth. It is their occupation. It is their goal in life to know what this truth is. And so they find Krishna. They may find Brahman, but if they're really searching for the truth, they find Krishna, because beyond the Brahma Jyoti is Krishna himself, Bhagavan. So that, I think that's the difference between the jnani, that separates the jnani.
Thank you, Kula Pradipa. Okay, the darshan is still yet to open. Thank you very much for speaking on this concept of Vidhi and connecting it to Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti. So it was so beautiful, and also I really appreciated the point that you made about referring to your Guru Maharaj, like how these regulative principles are actually principles of cognition. They are not just restrictions, but they give rise to knowledge. So those rules, the Vidhi, actually leads to knowledge when it is connected with the essence. So thank you so much for bringing up this point.
Srila Prabhupada.